Hello, everybody. Welcome to the University of South Alabama USA Library's Art Galleries Art Talk. Our featured speaker of the week is Miss Mary Rodney. Miss Mary, would you go ahead and
Yes,
tell us a little bit about yourself?
yes, I have been very fortunate to be able to live in different parts of the world, which has greatly added to my education. Having been educated as with a master's in biology in Minnesota, and then I proceeded to move to New York State, with my husband being in the medical school in Rochester, New York, which was a wonderful medical school. And subsequently, we lived in the Netherlands for one summer and doing medical research in the Royal Hospital in Edinburgh, Scotland. And then also, I was before college, even so, right after college, I should say, I was able to live in the Netherlands for 6 months as a result of my 4-H work that I was growing up. And that was very educational. When I returned home that day, I said to mom and dad, that was worth 4 years of college education, having lived outside of my culture with a different language and wonderful people to get to know and live in their families. Really getting to know the Netherlands. I'm still in touch with two of my families because I was not so good perhaps at writing letters, but once I could connect with my host brothers by email, that really connected our lives. And so we are still conversing occasionally. But I guess the biggest part of my background of travel ended up with being able to live the in in excuse me China for a summer. After having lived 2 years in Japan with my husband serving in the United States Navy, then I was able to live in Japan for one summer with a art program through the University of Minnesota, and I could study with a master watercolor painter in Hangzhou, China. After having lived in Japan, as I had said, and having studied sumie, sumie is a Japanese word for the ink brush painting, because sumi is the Japanese word for ink, and perhaps I'm mispronouncing it a bit, but sumie is the Japanese word for painting. So sumie, simply put, is ink painting. And I so appreciated that opportunity. My teacher was Hide Hawkinson. She was married to a wonderful Minnesota man, so we could connect with our backgrounds of growing up in Minnesota for her husband, and her being able to visit her family, her husband's family in Japan, in Minnesota also. All these connections go with me throughout my life, and they've made my life so rich. Now, of course, I'm down in Salmons, Alabama, so that adds to my resume also. Makes it even juicier, if I could put it that way. More complex. So I got introduced to sumie in Japan, and I cannot give it up. It's my joy every day to put a little bit of ink on paper or watercolor on paper, which I did this morning when I was biding my time to be able to do this Zoom presentation for you all. I was finishing a painting of Cascade Falls, which had a photograph of from 2 years ago when my friend and instructor, there's a wonderful Japanese expression, once a art instructor, always a friend, and that has certainly been my opportunity to become friends with wonderful art instructors. Susan Frame was our instructor up in the boundary waters of the New Canoe area, and besides being able to learn from Susan in the workshop, she would also take us to interesting places in that area of Minnesota, which is just absolutely beautiful. And one location we went to was the Cascade Falls, and it was just rumbling, water down the rocks into Lake Superior, I'm sure, was the destination of the water. And I had just had to try to paint it, just to keep it in my memory. Any of you looking at me, do you have any questions about my experience?
Well, I see the painting, one of the paintings that is one of our features this week behind you. Can you tell us a
Yes,
little bit about that painting?
I sure can, because this I when I was growing up in Japan, I guess growing up as an artist in Japan, because my master's was in biology, but then I moved to Japan and I became so fascinated with being able to paint and to get to know sumie, you have to learn. So I think it's important to learn the basic strokes. Once you have the basic strokes, then you can paint anything in life you want to paint. But I think it's very important to learn basic strokes, learning to use your brush. Asian people grow up being able to use their brushes because they're writing with their brush, whereas Americans grow up using a ballpoint pen or a pencil, and we're not as comfortable using a brush. So one of my instructors had said, Mary, learn a little bit of English Asian calligraphy because that will certainly improve your brush strokes. And I can verify that is very true. So I was learning the basic strokes with my first instructor, Heidi Hawkinson, and then I came home after doing the basic strokes. I think everybody, in retrospect, should learn to paint their own sites, their own scenes, their own animals, their own flowers, not just what the Asian people have painted for a millennia. So we live on a small farm in Selmas, Alabama, and in fall there was a wonderful scene by our pond, and that's what I painted for it's going to be in the national show, which will be starting online for 2 years, and it'll start the end of September. To anybody that wants to go to see all of the chosen paintings, to go to the usual http colon slash backslash sumie society.org. You all have my email address that are watching. If you want to get the address from me by email, I certainly can give you the address by email if you couldn't catch it by my speaking.
Mhm.
So where was I at?
So the painting behind you is of the
Oh,
pond near your house?
thank you. Yes, we have a pond behind east of our house, west, yeah, east of our house, and my children used to fish for sunfish brim down on the pond. But now it was just a beautiful scene, I thought. And I had learned how to do the brush work, crushed painting from Chunky Chi, who was the artist instructor who took us to China in 1984. And I had to just try what he had taught me how to do. So I did, and it turned out to be something that I thought looked a lot like our grove behind the pond. And that was the show that was chosen for the annual show. And then
That's
also,
one.
however,
Oh,
I have my chickadee painting because my neighbor Cindy Stanfield, who's looking at me too, gave me permission to paint her photograph of the chickadees meeting each other firsthand and being almost in love, I think, because they were so cute. I just had to paint it, and it's a smaller painting up here behind me also.
very nice. Very nice. Thank you. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Miss Mary? She gave me a list in case y'all did.
I know her so well. I don't want to ask her anything embarrassing.
I could handle that. I could handle that.
I have a question. Mary, your whole family seems to be artistically inclined. I remember one of the books, we have it, that Charles wrote. It was a haiku book, but your sons took the pictures for the book. So, I mean, it just seems to be a gift of your family. Are they all still involved in art in various ways?
In some ways, they all kind of took up the guitar playing a little bit. They're so busy with their careers, so but they all learned how to play the classical guitar, as well as they're all writers, excellent writers in their fields of expertise. The oldest is an archaeologist, and he is noted for being a good writer about archaeology. And then our middle son is a veterinarian, and so he hasn't done, but his daughters are much into uh, being able to sing and perform at what in theaters in the school at that age. And then the youngest is as an anesthesiologist in Mobile. In a sense, I think that's like a wonderful art form. You have to really be on top of things when you're going to be an anesthesiologist. And Kai is, I feel, very good at anesthesiologist. So thanks for asking that, Cindy, because obviously I think highly of our sons.
Okay, well then we have some questions that I'd like to ask Miss Mary. You told me that you had an original interest in a MA in biology, but then now you are working toward Asian technique. Can you explain why you made that transition or go into some detail about that choice?
Well, that happened mainly because we moved to Japan, and I always had enjoyed wanting to be an artist, but I thought that would not be any way I could feed myself over the years. And so when in college, I majored in biology and then subsequently got a master's in biology after when teaching in Rochester, New York at the University of Rochester. And the um, the art is not that far away from biology. Like most times when I'm starting class, new students that don't know me that as well as subsequent later on down. I might say that now, if you're painting by butterflies, you know, I'm going to make sure you have that butterfly with 6 legs all coming out of the thorax. So they have to know a little bit of the biology as well as being able to paint. And I think that just comes more naturally for me. When we were in Japan and my teacher was telling me to paint, what was it? I think it was bamboo, I think. And she said, now, Mary, you just paint some bamboo. I said, I don't know bamboo. How do I just paint? And so finally, when I realized that I've been growing up in Minnesota fishing with cane poles with my grandfather every night when he was supposed to be helping my father milk the cows, then I knew just what a cane of the bamboo was. So I could begin to understand that biology needed to paint bamboo. So that's how that was one reason I hopped from biology to being able to paint. If I paint it realistically, my goal is to be able to move on to abstract painting, but I'm not there yet.
Okay. You broached this a little bit, but maybe you could go in a little bit more detail. What is CMA and what is the major contribution to art history and the inclusion of Asian art?
Good question, because the first time I had my dance and art history book, they didn't have any Asian paintings in it. I'm sure it does now. But sumi is to repeat is ink, and is the Japanese word for painting. So sumi is simply ink painting. Nothing difficult to speak about. You can add that to your dictionary right away. Sumi. And moving right along to Asian art, Asian art started with their calligraphy years ago, millennia ago, I think I could say. And then that evolved into painting scenes as well as after having known how to do their calligraphy. And it has become used by Western artists also to use their brushwork. Being able to learn how to do the strokes. One of my early students had majored in art in another school that I won't will not name necessarily, but and she said, you know, Mary, you've been teaching me how to do the strokes for all my paintings. I majored in art, and they never told me how to stroke correctly. And she said it's so helpful to do my watercolor paintings, knowing better how to stroke the areas that how I want them to be created. And so when my students, like Cindy has been my student briefly, and we started learning the strokes, and that comes from learning the basic. They call them the 4 gentlemen. My elementary students always say, "Well, where are the gentlewomen?" Of course, but I just tell them that's what's the major plants and symbols that are recognized by the Asian peoples. And so the first is the bamboo. Maybe it doesn't have to be in this order, but the bamboo is one. The Chinese orchid, which is my favorite to paint, the chrysanthemum, and the plum blossom. When you learn those four objects, 4 plants, then you know the basic strokes, and that's what leads you to be able to do any paintings you want to do.
Okay.
I can prove that. You can do it too, Paula.
Very nice. Okay. see. How are the Asian traditional methods usually taught, and how did you learn the Asian techniques?
Well, we ended up, my husband had to serve in the United States Navy in Okinawa, Japan. And that was, it turned out to be a real joy. It didn't start to be that way, but it didn't start to be that way, but it turned out to be a wonderful broadening of my whole life. And so that I could learn in the environment of the painting background. And
Okay.
that
Okay.
led me to it.
Cool. So once the student learns the brush strokes, what's the next step?
Branching out and doing their own theme. For example, if they are very attached to painting to have their dog, then I would say, I tell my elementary students, please paint your dog. And then, because you really know your dog, you really know what you see and what you love to be with, and that's what solves the concern about being able to paint it well. If you don't know exactly what it's supposed to look like if I didn't really know what bamboo looked like, it would have been much more difficult to paint it in Japan, even though I had learned a little bit about the stock of bamboo in Minnesota. Did that answer that question?
It does. It does. Thank you. Okay. So what's then your goal with the subject after you studied it?
Just to improve my ability to do it well, to do it energetically. There is a wonderful Asian word that is used. Once you catch the spirit of something you are painting, they call it, the word is chi, C-H-I. And that is what my goal will be. And I feel my pond painting behind me in this photograph, this Zoom presentation, caught this chi of my pond that day.
Okay.
And I hope I can pursue that with all my paintings. Sometimes I don't achieve that, but I can go back and do it over again. And maybe the next time I feel that it will be really the essence, the spirit of what I wanted to capture into my painting.
Okay. So how are you keeping your skills fresh today? Is there some sort of group that you work with or people that you communicate with regularly? I know you do a lot of volunteer activities in the community too, so you are more than welcome to share those.
Okay. I will say that 35 years ago, another woman who had lived in Japan after World War II, her husband had served in the army at that time, and she was an artist of sumi, and she was bound and determined that she would create a chapter of the art form here in Mobile. And so she called me and pulled me into the whole affair. I told Marguerite Artistry at the first time, I really like rather be painting than leading a group. But then Marguerite convinced me that it would be good for my own spirit and my own skills to be able to share them with other people in Mobile. And I had already people that were asking me to teach them how to do sumi because they had heard about it, but they had never had any idea of anything about how to paint it, how to paint with that method, that technique, I should say. And so 35 years ago, we started our chapter, and at that time, Patty Boyd Wilson was very big in art circles here in Mobile. She had been very involved with the Mobile Art Museum, working down in the basement of the art museum, and she came to that meeting for forming the Shibui chapter. Well, I should say, well, we weren't the new Shibui chapter, but then subsequently we were trying to figure out a name we should call ourselves. And so I turned to Patty. And so she said, Mary, why don't you call it this Shibui chapter? Well, that was a good idea, I thought. So we passed it around the small group that had agreed to become the first chapter. We had made our constitution, we had done all our bylaws and all that sort of thing that you have to do when you want to have a nonprofit organization connected to the larger non organization. And so Shibui is a word that's hard to translate. Like there are many languages, they will be an essence of a word. Sometimes some doesn't really, it's hard to nail down what it means. But Shibui is, one dictionary might say, it's the elegance of a understated object, understated painting, not showy, just so beautiful you can't even talk about it. You can't say anything about it because it's so beautiful. So Shibui, our goal is to create all such beautiful paintings you can't even begin to believe how beautiful they are. So that's our Shibui is the name of our chapter. That's Shibui, Japanese name. And there's the second part of that question, Paula.
Are you connected with any groups today that are helping you maintain your skills or work with anybody?
Yes, whenever you're with a group that wants to learn, then I know that what I teach, I learn more from the students than they teach, than I can teach them. And I always learn from working with other people that wanting to do sommelier. And that's such a joy to be able to conquer that every time.
Well,
And
fabulous.
we have the Japanese garden house. I call it the Japanese garden house, and the little white house on Ziegler Boulevard and Forest Hill Drive, which everybody can find. We meet and learn how to paint twice a month when we can. We haven't been doing it for a while, but we will be picking up. And we can also enjoy our Japanese garden. In summer, it's wonderful lotus blooming and can so beautifully be painted also, because then you can really get to know lotus and be able to paint it as well as enjoy it at the garden. And so that adds to my ability, I feel, to be able to be around other people who enjoy what I love to do, and they try to do it too, or they not only try, they succeed in doing it. And so now, in celebrating our 35th anniversary, we're hoping to have a show as we did when we were 30 years old, 30-year anniversary. Also, we had the national show 30 years ago in Mobile, and we had a show, art show, down at the Cathedral Square Gallery at the time. And so we will hopefully try to do it again, maybe even a virtual show at the USA Library, or maybe subsequently after we can actually have a show in a gallery. We're nowhere, I guess.
Okay, wonderful. All right, Mary. Well, I think that's it for the questions. Thank you so much. I do have one more question I always ask because we are associated with the University of South Alabama and we talk and deal with students. What is some piece of advice that you can give to the students at USA and students of the world?
I would say never think you can't do it. You can do anything you really try. As my teacher would say when a big painting I was supposed to be able to create, she said, "Well, Mary, just start with the small things." And then, oh, that's what I did. And eventually I had the whole painting done. So I think even no matter what your subject will be, start with the small things that you know you can achieve on, you can capture, and then you can do anything else in your life, in your education, in your careers, and fly with the eagle to be able to achieve
Mhm.
your goal in life.
Cool. Thank you very much. Everybody stay on. We're just going to stop recording, but this is it. Thank you everybody for attending.
Oh, thank you, Paula.
Yeah, no problem.
Mhm.